So today we'll start with Block 5, American Poetry 1. The objectives of this unit will be the primary objective would be to give an idea of some of the major texts of Walt Whitman, and the texts that shall be covered would be Song of Myself, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, and Passage to India. So while Song of Myself, which was published in 1885, shows the poet's youthful exuberance and figures prominently in the first edition of Leaves of Grass. Passage to India, however, occurs in the later part of the 19th century, that is 1871 to 72 edition of Leaves of Grass. So coming to the introduction part, Song of Myself is the first text of Walt Whitman, included in the first edition, as I mentioned. So it did not bear the writer's name and had only the title Leaves of Grass and the date and place of publication, that is Brooklyn, New York, 1885. It is a long, rambling poem preoccupied with the poet's unique self. It also seeks to establish rapport, comradeship, and utmost communion with the reader. The self of the poet seems to embrace nature, civilization, men, women, and children. It may be said that the cosmos is assimilated by the poet, who emerges as the bard of American democracy. The youthful exuberance and high spirits found in the text is also present abundantly in Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, which got published in 1856, in which the focus is on the river, the sunset, the ferry boat, and the details of daily life. The poet's self and the crowd, the present generation and the future generation, and the I of the poet and the you of the reader. The you also stands for all the commuters of the past, the present, and the future who want to reach home. The poet celebrates human brotherhood and fraternity as the core of the American Republic. Though it was the Civil War, which was from 1861 to the year 1865, that marked a turning point in the history of the American Republic. The North as able to subjugate the South, and President Abraham Lincoln was re-elected as the supreme head of the Union. The assassination of the hero of the Civil War led to Walt Whitman's third major text, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, the year 1865. It is a powerful elegy lamenting the martyrdom of Abraham Lincoln, and also as a poem coming to terms with the assassination of the president. The poet is also able to picture death as a kind of prelude to national cohesion and rebirth, and as the healer of the wounds of the Civil War. The next last text, that is Passage to India, the year 1871 to 72, is the fourth major text of Walt Whitman, which was added to the 1871 to 72 edition of Leaves of Grass. And it tries to fuse the technological progress of the New World with the ancient wisdom and love of the East. There is a kind of soaring vision of the entire globe being united into a compact whole, transcending the barriers of geography, history, and culture. Long before globalization could become a reality, Whitman could see the glimpses of a unified world emerging in the last quarter of the 19th century. No American writer has been more influential nationally and internationally than Walt Whitman. Poets from his time to our own in the United States and around the world have talked back to Whitman, carrying on the conversation that he initiated over 150 years ago, a dialogue about democracy, poetry, love, death, and endless permutations of life that he believed would define America and eventually produce a republic equal to its ideals. Coming to the first text, that is Song of Myself, it got published in the year 1885. It is a long, rambling poem, as I talked about before. It spans the poet's self, the reader, nature, and the cosmos. The poet is 37 years old here and is in perfect collaboration with his own self. It is the earth's consisting rivers, mountains, wind that has nurtured him. Even within his house, he is able to feel impact of all kinds of perfumes. However, what he loves most is the feel of the world outside. It is the refreshing air, the rustle of green leaves, the silence of dry leaves, the sight of the seashore, and the sea rocks that stir him deeply. They fill him with deep delight. One may see the traces of Wordsworth's love of maturity in himself and in Whitman's depiction of nature. It is the nature that is being focused upon. Though there is an important difference between Whitman and Wordsworth. While Whitman always refers to the reader and seeks involvement and communion with a like-minded soul, the poetry of Wordsworth is mostly that of a solitary man, brooding and meditating. Nonetheless, the you is important in Song of Myself than the I. The poet seeks to question the reader if he has an idea of the size of the earth. He also asks the reader, have you reckoned 1,000 acres much? Have you reckoned the earth much? Thus, unless the reader is able to respond to the sheer diversity and glory of the earth, he would not be able to grasp the full meaning of the text of Song of Myself. The preoccupation with his own self does not turn Whitman into a hermit or a recluse. He wants to confirm if the reader would be able to measure up to Whitman's vision. The poet is as much preoccupied with the celebration of his self as with the establishment of a community of like-minded people. The search for an ideal, healthy community is extremely important in Song of Myself. The poet is also aware of the horrors of fratricidal war, the fever of doubtful news, the fitful events. These come to me days and nights and come from me again, but they not the me myself. Whitman seems to be an optimist, certainly, and like transcendentalists like Emerson and Thoreau, believes that man can make phenomenal progress, but he is also aware of the evils of slavery, the North-South divide and growths of sectarian violence that posed a great danger to the ideal of human brotherhood and fraternity. Therefore, one may assume that Song of Myself is a poem of hope and fulfillment, which Walt Whitman is definitely carrying forward through this poem of his. Whitman opens his poem with the conventional iambic pentameter line as if to suggest the formal openings of the classic epics, before abandoning metrics for a free-flowing line with rhythms that shift and respond to the moment. Instead of invoking the muse to allow him to sing the epic song of war, rage, and distant journeys, Whitman becomes his own muse, singing himself and announcing the subject of his epic will be himself. He celebrates that self, and the etymology of the word celebrate indicates to return to or to frequent. The whole poem will be Whitman's record of the self expanding out into the world, absorbing more and more experience, then contracting back into the self, discovering that he can contain and hold the wild diversity of experience that he keeps encountering on his journeys through the world. He sets out to expand the boundaries of the self to include first all fellow Americans, then the entire world, and ultimately the cosmos. Throughout the poem, Whitman probes the question of how large the new democratic self can become before it dissipates into contradiction and fragmentation. And each time he seems to reach the limit, he dilates even more. In the first 3 lines, he abandons the 2 main things that separate people, that create animosity, jealousy and war, beliefs and possessions. For instance, what I assume, you shall assume. For every atom belonging to you as good belongs to me. At every level of our being, we are incessantly transferring and exchanging materials, ideas, emotions, and affections. The atoms that yesterday composed a living cow or a growing plant today are part of us, as the eternal atoms of the universe continue their non-stop interaction and rearrangement. It is in this way that Whitman introduces us to his two main characters, I and you. This section begins with I and ends with you, just as the entire Song of Myself does the same. We experience the transfer of energy from Whitman's I to the you that we as readers learn to inhabit in this poem. It is possible to hear the you in song as addressed to the entire nation or the entire world. And it is also possible to hear it as intimately addressed only to the individual reader in this particular moment of encounter. It is one of the most difficult words in the poem to translate, because the second person pronoun in English is quite promiscuous. You is the word we use to address our most intimate lover, as well as a total stranger, a single person alone with us in a room or a vast crowd. Whitman teases out all the implications of this promiscuous English pronoun that signals at once only you, a simple, separate person, and also you, the en masse, the world of potentially intimate strangers who always hover around us. Thinking of the land he grew up in and of his ancestors, he realizes that every leaf of grass is a sign of transference, like the grass that grows from graves as the atoms of the dead arise again out of the earth, and now give voice to him, forming the very tongue that will sing of his past. His organ of vocalization is literally made up of the atoms of the land he sings on and sings about. So Song of Myself starts us out on what the poet will call a perpetual journey, a quest, one that turns into an escape narrative for all readers of the poem, who need to liberate themselves from all the enslaving beliefs and possessions that prevent individual growths, who need to put creeds and schools in abeyance, and risk a journey that will take us beyond preconceived notions of good and bad, a journey that will allow us to confront the original energy of nature unchecked, nature freed of the restraints that we all have been taught to put on it. The first stanza, or the first section of Song of Myself, the lines are quite intriguing per se. I celebrate myself and I sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spare of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from the soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same and the parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health begin, hoping to stop or cease not till death. Creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a while sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad. I permit to speak at every hazard. Nature without check with original energy. The last section is quite intriguing as well, which is the seventh section. Has anyone supposed it lucky to be born? I hasten to inform him or her it is just as lucky to die, and I know it. I pass deaths with the dying and births with the new washed babe, and I am not contained between my hat and boots. And peruse manifold objects, no two alike, and every one good. The earth's good, and the stars good, and their adjuncts all good. I am not an earth nor an adjunct of an earth. I am the mate and companion of people, all just as immortal and fathomless as myself. Coming to the second important text, the poem of Walt Whitman, which is Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. It was published in 1856 as Sundown Poem in the second edition of Leaves of Grass, and revised and retitled in later editions. It is a sensitive, detailed record of the poet's thoughts and observations about the continuity of nature and of brotherhood while aboard a ferry between Brooklyn and Manhattan. Central to the work is the poet's sense of oneness with the world. He considers that people a century later will have a similar experience in the same place. His panoramic description of the harbor includes rich images of sunlight on the water, the flight of seagulls, and the commerce of ships. Through the use of repetition, exclamation, and apostrophe, Whitman conveys his joyful beliefs in world solidarity. Crossing Brooklyn Ferry is Whitman's reflection on the glory of the shared human experience. Crossing New York's East River one day, the poem's speaker is struck by the realization that the people of the past, present, and future are all deeply connected. One day, long after the speaker is gone, other people will stand just where he is standing, with the same thoughts and feelings he is having right now. Because all of humanity shares in existence and experience. The speaker joyfully concludes, no one is ever really alone. Neither time nor space can truly separate people from each other. The notion that people throughout human history saw and felt, see and feel the same things that the speaker is seeing and feeling right now makes the speaker feel deeply connected to all humanity. And because everyone who has ever lived or will ever live takes part in the shared experience that is existence itself, the speaker suggests no one is ever really alone. In other words, humanity is united by the mere experience of being human. The sight of New York and all its people makes this vast human unity feel immediate to the speaker. While the city itself may evolve over time, the people who will live in the New York of the future will still have essentially the same thoughts and feelings that the speaker does have right now. They will admire the beauty of the city and enjoying the company of their loved ones, just like he does. In thinking about the people who will make this same quest and share the same emotional experiences in the future, the speaker gets the sense he is actually with them. This is because the speaker feels that he and everyone around him is part of the scheme, taking part in the ongoing flow of existence, which is as continuous as the river beneath him. For that reason, the separations of distance and place are only illusions and do not really matter. Every person everywhere is united in the river of being, that is, merely by existing in the first place. Since the people of the past, present, and future are thus all connected, everyone can take comfort in the fact that no matter how lonely they feel, they are never really alone. Reaching out directly to his future readers, the speaker assures them that they do not suffer the dark patches of life by themselves. They have the company of everyone who has ever lived and who will ever live. In fact, at exactly the same moment the readers of the future read the words of this poem, he suggests he is as good as looking at them now. And it is only outward appearances that make anyone think otherwise. As the speaker shifts from addressing the crowd to the second person, something strange happens. The crowds become not only the literal crowds of commuters on the ferry, but also more expansively, everyone who has ever rode the ferry, and then finally everyone who has returned home, including the reader of the poem. Throughout the poem, he alternately despairs of his distance from his fellow men, and then feels himself coming to know them, as in the 5th section where he writes, "Closer yet I approach you." As if to mimic the ebb tide and the flood tide that Whitman continually refers to in the poem. The poem itself moves closer, as in the intimate address of the 1st section, and then farther away, as in the 2nd section, where Whitman begins to list a series of abstract meditative observances, each beginning with the and using passive verbless syntax, with phrases like the similitudes of the past and those of the future, and the others that are to follow me, the ties between them and me. He creates a rocking motion within each line, as well as a kind of distance between the speaker and the reader. In addition, the expansive anaphoric lines mimic the movement of the boat and the ebb and flow of the tides, which is at once comforting, mesmerizing, and even if its repetition, numbing. The third section is a detailed description of the sights and sounds of the ferry ride that the speaker claims will be shared by every future rider of the ferry. The repetition of syntax is shown here to its full advantage and scope, where he begins each line with the word just, invoking both the Bible and Shakespeare, and serving the greater purpose of uniting the disparate elements of the scene around him. Stating a few lines from the poem, just as you feel when you look on the river and sky, so I felt. Just as any of you is one of a living crowd, I was one of a crowd. Just as you are refreshed by the gladness of the river and the bright flow, I was refreshed. Just as you stand and lean on the rail, yet hurry with the swift current, I stood yet was hurried. Just as you look on the numberless masts of ships and the thick-stemmed pipes of steamboats, I looked. Walt Whitman gives equal weight to both natural and man-made images in this section, noticing the numberless masts of ships as well as the swift current. He writes of the simple, compact, well-joined scheme, myself disintegrated. Everyone disintegrated, yet part of the scheme. The repetitive phrasing in this poem is an enactment of the poem's subject matter. Example, crossing back and forth. Each individual on the ferry, but also in the past, present and future of Whitman's world, as well as each disparate image, is at once completely separated and joined to a greater purpose, what he comes to call later the soul. The ferry journey at the close of day brings to mind Charon carrying his passengers across the river Styx. Though this is not a poem only about mortality, this layer of image and myth lends weight and gravity to the very real and very commonplace experience of the daily journey back to home. As a reader, we are at once the future perfection waiting for the arrival of the ferry. But because we are now presently living, we are the travelers as well. In the final line, Whitman refers to the soul as if there were only one without ownership. That is, not your soul and not my soul. There is also a slight echo with the unwritten word whole, paths towards the whole, as if the words might mean the same thing. Whitman has united the disparate elements of the crowd and has drawn closer to his fellow travelers by imagining a unified whole. The dualities of the poem are resolved, light and dark, reader and writer, past and future, life and death. All become momentarily the same as the ferry approaches the shore. There are many men and women who are ready to use Brooklyn ferry and reach home. There would also be many more men and women who would use the ferry in future as well. The past, present, and the future seem to constitute the eternal flux of time. Individuals stand alone, and yet they form a part of multitude. The tie that binds transcends all barriers of space and time. The islands that are separated would be bound by Brooklyn ferry. Even after 100 years, the commuters would continue to negotiate Brooklyn ferry. The poet feels a kinship with the existing generation and also with the generations to come. The sea is full of countless ships and steamboats. There are also seagulls hovering the sky. The poet's eyes are so dazzled by the reflection of his head in sunlit water. There is also haze around the hills towards the south. While some ships are arriving, some have already arrived. The sea near Brooklyn ferry has ships and steamboats from all around the world. The flags of all nations are also visible. Long before globalization has started in the world today, there is a glimpse of this process in crossing Brooklyn ferry. There is a degree of sanity and self-knowledge in Walt Whitman that is astounding. He is a romantic who is never carried too far away from reality. His feet are firmly planted on the solid earth. In crossing Brooklyn Ferry, both good and evil are pictured with candor and insight. In the last section of the poem, the poet visualizes the panorama in and around Brooklyn Ferry. He urges the gorgeous clouds in the sky to drench him with their splendor. He also urges them to drench the generation of men and women negotiating Brooklyn Ferry. He urges them to drench with their splendor the generations to come. The proximity of hills of Brooklyn and the masts of Manhattan is also suggested. To sum up here, the poet celebrates both his self and also what surrounds his self. That is the sea, the islands, the life in cities, the present and the future. The ships of all nations and the flags are as beautifully pictured as the poet's self, encompassing both good and evil. Life seems to have immense possibilities for Walt Whitman's Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. A few lines that I'd like to read from the Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. You have waited, you always wait, you dumb, beautiful ministers. We receive you with free sense at last, and are insatiate henceforward. This is the ninth section. Not you any more shall be able to foil us, or withhold yourselves from us. We use you and do not cast you aside. We plant you permanently within us. We fasten you not, we love you. There is a perfection in you also. You furnish your paths towards eternity. Great or small, you furnish your paths towards the soul.